Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Older Women for the Voice webinar. It's wonderful to see people starting to join in the participants, and it's also absolutely fantastic to have this distinguished panel, sort of beside me in the interwebs, beside and below. It is on my screen. It's probably different on yours. But anyway, it's lovely to have this distinguished panel to discuss this incredibly important moment in our history. And so I will begin by introducing them all. First of all, we have Beverly Baker, who is the chair of the Older Women's Network, and we'll be coming back to Beverly in just a minute for her to do the acknowledgement of country. We also have Professor Lynette Riley, who is Professor of Aboriginal Education and Indigenous Studies at Sydney University. And with us as well, we have Dr. Stephanie Dowrick, who is, an extremely accomplished author and pundit and, woman about town, I would say. Stephanie, she called me that once in a very nice review that I liked, and I liked being called a woman about town. So I'm giving her the same compliment. Now we're going to go to Bev, who is going to do the acknowledgement, and then we'll get stuck in to talking about the voice and why older women in particular, or especially, but also against all the cliches that we keep hearing, should support the voice along with everybody else. Okay, over to you, Bev.
Thanks, Jane. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that wherever we meet today, we meet on the land of our Indigenous peoples, land that has never been ceded. I offer my respects to elders past and present, and I trust that the guardians, the spirits, will guide us as we walk upon this sacred land. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bev. And here. I thought I'd start, honestly, with the kind of obvious question for all three of the panelists, but I might start with Lynette and then go to Stephanie and then to Bev. But why? Why have you come to the decision that when you cast your vote, or you may already have cast your vote in this referendum, that your ballot paper will say yes, the word yes? Lynette, first to you. Why?
I think one of the key reasons for me is I've been totally frustrated over the years with the way in which we constantly set up Aboriginal advisory groups, and then the next political party comes in and at their whim abolishes it. I'm going back to 1958. All right. So in 1958 to 1978, we had the Federal Council for the Advancement of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples. They actually helped to lobby for the 1967 referendum. I might say here that I find it ironic that for us to have changes made, we've had to have two referendums.
Yeah.
All right. So they were disbanded in 78. Then in 1980, Fraser set up the Aboriginal Development Commission. Then it was abolished. Then in 1990 to 2005, we had ATSIC, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Committee, set up by Hawke. Then it was dissolved by John Howard. Can you see the pattern coming in here? Every single time an advisory group is set up by a particular political party, and then the next group that comes in abolishes it. And the people that suffer from that are Aboriginal people in their communities, who then have to start all over again to petition for a voice, to petition for a structure. I remember in 1976 going to one of the Facilitator meetings as a student rep. I was at Teachers College, so excited, so awed by Aboriginal people represented them for all over Australia. And that was the first time I met two of my mentors, Kay and Olive Mundine, who took me under their wings and showed me what it was all about. That's what it is for me. I'm tired of being a political football and I want a system that is in place so that we have a formal agreement and we cannot continually be abolished.
And that's why it's important it's in the Constitution, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it seems to be a complexity, though it's not very complex, particularly when you explain it like that so many people either are having difficulty getting their head around or finding it convenient not to get their head around. Stephanie, what about you? Why have you decided it's a yes?
Well, for me, it wasn't a decision. For me, it was just, why wouldn't you? But, I came to Australia in 1983. I'd lived 16 years in Europe, and I come from New Zealand, Aotearoa. I was then shocked, and I remain shocked at the degree to which our First Nations have to petition to be heard. It's outrageous, because it's not only about being heard around disadvantage, it's also being heard around the knowledge that they have that we could all benefit from. This will not be a country with heart and integrity and decency, just common decency, until this is achieved. It's not everything, but it's so significant. And I feel like the referendum has almost become a referendum about the kind of Australia we want it to be. Yeah. Do I want to live in a country in which First Nations are dishonoured and excuses made for that, and media, promoting trivia and idiotic arguments around this and that, rather than coming to the point? Do we recognise that First Nations caretook, adored, loved, grew from this land for 60,000 years, and that it is our privilege to live alongside? But just before you move to Beverly, can I just read the question? This is the question that people will say yes or no to, and it's so simple. The question is, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Without it, it's just cosmetic. It's more lipstick. Yeah. Do you approve this proposed alteration? I mean, really, what's difficult there?
Well, I don't see anything, but if the polls are correct, it seems far too many of our fellow citizens don't agree.
Yes, because they have been so wickedly misinformed and confused, and that's built on prejudice. That misinformation and confusion is built on, for many of them, a lifetime of prejudice. And we have a chance to meet this, not with more prejudice, but just with some glorious facts. So I'm loving to hear from Beverly.
Yeah, I'd like to get back to the whole idea of why and how this campaign has been, I think, pretty comprehensively derailed in a minute. But first of all, I'd like to get Bev's answer as to why she's voting yes.
Well, how long have you got? I mean, really and truly.
Well, I think we've got it until about 4:30, but it'd be good if somebody else got to say something at some point too.
Bad luck. Look, I've been appalled all my life at the way we have treated our First Nations people. I first discovered it as a young person, could not believe that that's what we were doing, as enforcing our Aboriginal people to carry certificates of leave and seek permission to walk around. I was more horrified to find out that up till 1972, a majority at a local government school could exclude an Aboriginal student from being educated. To me, all my life I've worked in the not-for-profit sector. I've worked for disadvantaged groups. I have worked across the board, from disability, public education, health, welfare, the climate, and in every one of those instances, we have demanded of government nothing about us without us. Please talk to us before you do anything to us. And as a woman, that has been our clarion call from the suffragettes as to having a say in what happens. I am absolutely gobsmacked. In 2023, there is any argument that there should be no right for an Aboriginal person as a First Nation person to have a say in what we do to them and for them. Nothing with them, nothing about them without them is, to me, the clarion call. And I think that anyone can grasp that as a simple proposal.
Yeah.
You would have thought. It's interesting when you were talking about your memories of how Aboriginal Australians were treated, you know, when you were young, when we were young. And I'm interested in that idea that this is called Older Women for the Voice. Do you think that, in fact, because each one of us has been around for many decades, that actually we have a clearer memory of what Australia used to be like, and so many young people simply have no conception of the kind of racism that was just a part of the warp and weft of our society? I mean, I'm not saying it's entirely gone, but it's nowhere near what it was in the 1950s, 60s and 70s. Lynette, do you agree that a perspective of age changes the way you see things?
Oh, yes. You know, I'm thinking back to the days when my father and mother would say to me that, you know, I had to sign all the letters in the household for Dad. He taught me his signature because he and Mum were only allowed to go to 3rd class, so couldn't read very well, and if at all. And so I would have to read all the letters, and especially any special forms that came. And then he would get me to sign things on his behalf. And I never, ever, you know, used that ability for anything other than what he wanted me to do it for. I still remember the days as being in, like, was it 4th class, and all the Aboriginal kids who were in my year being lined up in front of the deputy principal's office, so we could have gunk poured into our hair because we all would. It was understood we would all have head lice. Now, let me tell you, head lice are do not racially profile you. They will go into any child's head.
Blondes are particularly a problem because you can see it.
Yeah, my mum was just appalled, you know, so upset that her kids have to suffer through this, you know. Well, kids who would quite openly say to me, oh, my mum said you're not allowed, kids like you are not allowed to come to my house. I knew that it was because I was Aboriginal. You know, so for me, you know, the major changes started to change as Aboriginal people started to get into education themselves, started to get into higher paid positions so that they could influence. And that was one of the reasons my family said to me, we actually need you in education because you need to create change by being in it. You can't change it from sitting outside. And so for me, the voice is a no-brainer because we can't change things if we're not sitting at the table, you know, and the voice allows us to sit at the table so we can contribute and have things change that are relevant to us culturally, linguistically, morally, ethically, everything, you know. I don't understand why you would even say no.
No. Well, the parallels are quite with the fight for women's rights are quite striking. And I've seen people sharing the kinds of arguments that were used against giving women the vote and how much they mirror the kinds of arguments that are being used against the voice. And, you know, it's now almost banal to say that women need to be at the tables where decisions are made, that women need to have control of their own bodies and reproductive rights and all that kind of thing, and that, you know, we can now turn around and say to men who pontificate about whether we should be allowed abortions or not, what the hell would you know? It's not something you're ever going to face. We seem to have accepted that. Why is it we still don't? It strikes me, and maybe I'll ask you about this, Stephanie, that we're racist when it suits us, and then we deny we're racist when it suits us. In the same way as the society I remember in the 50s, 60s and 70s was sexist when it suited them, but then denied that there was any sexism actually happening. Yeah. Do you see those parallels too, Stephanie, as a long-time feminist?
I do, but I also want to come back to Lynette. I spend quite a lot of time in Larrakia country up in the Northern Territory. Now, my husband's a paediatrician. He's been there 42 years. I think he was the second paediatrician full-time there. We have children today with rheumatic heart disease, with third world diseases of poverty. We have families with one tap. I mean, that dreadful remark that Miss Price made about now we have running water. She's clearly never left, you know, her comfortable home in Alice Springs. I say that with great passion because I also published an article today which said, you know, the 90-member strong Central Land Council asks you to vote yes, yes. So I know what the poverty is that is. It's a tricky thing. It's not just about race, though it's racism that informs it. It's about indigeneity, and it's the justifications of the colonizers. It's more complicated. In the same way, the justifications of the patriarchy say, oh, well, you've got all your rights now, but you look at a picture on the news of a really important occasion where something is being decided about, let's say Ukraine or the Middle East or anywhere. How many women are present? How many women are present? And, you know, when we've got really big decisions to make, how many women are present? Well, fortunately, at the moment, we have a government with 50-50, and I think that's part of why there is this passion in the Labour Party to get this through. You know, they do understand that these issues of class, of race, but also of indigeneity and colonization, as well as gender, as well as sexism, go together, as well as homophobia and so on and so on. We cannot separate them. It's naive to separate them. But we could also say that women who are disadvantaged around several of those issues are more than triply disadvantaged.
Yeah. Stephanie, the biggest example of that is a few years ago when Tony Abbott appointed himself as the spokesperson for Aboriginal people and women. Like, you couldn't get more ludicrous than that. And that's really what the status quo is, because nobody kicked up a stink. Nobody said, oh, that is just so wrong. That's the status quo. That is what no means.
Yeah. Well, and Tony Abbott has an absolute, he's got a PhD in ludicrous, I would have thought.
Look, the thing for me, Jane, is that there was a massive amount of work done in a report called The Little Children Are Sacred, which had really positive steps forward. And what came out of that was the intervention, an intervention that smashed Aboriginal communities, destroyed their self-determination, destroyed work that was already in place of engaging and embracing. The only people who supported that I could find was Jacinta Price. No other Aboriginal groups supported it. Individuals did because it helped with a personal issue. But as a group, there was no support for that bully boy bringing in the army, smashing the working that had been going on in those communities. If we can stop that, by enabling Aboriginal people to be able to talk about these issues, the Little Children Are Sacred report would have produced amazing outcomes with people talking about the issues involved rather than talking about, as John Howard wanted us to talk about, dysfunctional, poorly educated, overly sexualized communities, which is not the truth. It was never the truth, but it was the truth that was sold. It was the truth that was adopted, and it was the truth that was embraced by Jacinta Price. For no other reason, I will never forgive her, because she did so much damage. And the reason I know she does so much damage is that I was working with a community in the Territory called Titchakala on a project that they were doing at the time, which was around tourism. And it absolutely smashed that project, which was empowering. It was getting kids back into school. It was embracing culture. It was having the elders work with the emerging younger people coming up to understand culture and reason and practice and habit. All of that was just swept absolutely into the abyss, because the IPA believed that Indigenous people on their own territories were a threat and they needed to be removed. And John Howard went, yep, that's what we're going to do. And out of nowhere came the intervention. We can never afford to see that again. Never.
No,
it's interesting what you say.
To see that again, and we can never afford to have a Conservative government, God willing that there'll never be another one. But the minute they come in, they would abolish the voice if it was not constitutionally enshrined. And even then they could reduce it. So we have to look at all these bits together. We have to see that we not only need the voice, we need to consolidate its effectiveness. And, you know, Pat Turner and Nachos, during the COVID epidemic, proved, evidence-based proof, that when Aboriginal communities take on their own health risks and minimize their own health risks despite overcrowding and all that goes with poverty, they had fantastic outcomes. They had world record outcomes because they managed it. Yeah. And they managed it in culturally appropriate ways, but also with wisdom ways. I mean, years ago, I interviewed Miriam Rose Ungamer-Bauman, who was our Senior Australian of the Year. And she said, she lives in Daly River in NT. I walk in two worlds, but we're not learning from that other world.
No, we are closing our ears a lot of the time. Yeah. It strikes me too that there's something fundamentally, I think, racist in much the same way as I've always thought it's sexist, to insist that all Aboriginal people must agree, that it is not that, oh, no, well, you know, we can't have the voice because there are some Aboriginal people who don't want it. Well, I'm sorry, I can't think of any referendum question that's ever been put about anything that every white fella agreed with, and all women are not a job lot and all older people are not a job lot. It is a kind of racism, isn't it, to think that, oh, well, all Aboriginal people have to be on board or else we can't do it.
Yeah. Can I go back to what Beverly was saying, because that this is the height of racism, and that is that, you know, in 1948, every country in the world signed up to a declaration on human rights of what every person in the world has a right to. And then in 2007, John Howard, with the NT intervention, suspended the human rights of Aboriginal people so he could go in, and it was basically a way to grab land back from Aboriginal people. Let's be honest. He said it was because of the nefarious ways in which Aboriginal people were fundamentally, you know, incapable of looking after themselves and their kids. But the reality of it was that it was about taking land back. Now, at the same time in 2007, you had 20 years of work with the release of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So not only does he suspend human rights here in Australia, but also Australia through John Howard led the campaign along with Canada, New Zealand and the United States of America not to support the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And you can't get more racist than that. So we're talking about a voice that gives power to Aboriginal people to have a say all the time.
But what I was going to say was, if there was a voice, there would be much more difficulty in doing those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And to have the voice. Sorry,
Bev first and then Stephanie. Bev.
Look, to have the voice embedded in our Constitution meets our obligations under international conventions. We are a signatory to the International Convention on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples. Yet we have done nothing, the same as we've done nothing on the rights of the child, to put into law the meaningful application of that act of that UN convention. Now, in the words of Justice Mason, the fact that we've signed it means it is not an nullity. It means that we have an obligation. This is the meeting of that obligation in a really open, generous, thoughtful and kind way, because it is asking us to walk along beside people, not take over, dominate, do as we say. It's walk with us as we build a better nation. And that's what the whole thing is about.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, you wanted to say something?
No, it's fine. Beverly has said much better than I could. But we also have to look at the power of media, which is an area where Jane and I both work. And really, the harm that politicians can do in this country is only possible because of the lack of integrity and the commitments to utter self-interest, blatant self-interest, big business interests that dominate our media.
And we shouldn't. Sorry, Stephanie, again.
Sorry. We cannot move forward. We're trying to do this. For example, this referendum, not with one leg tied to the other, but with, two legs tied together and only one arm free, because we have such a powerful right-wing, lobbyist-driven media. And how ironic that it is a lobbyist-driven media denying First Nations the right to lobby a little bit.
They only like certain lobbying. They don't like climate change protests either. That's the clamping down on that as well. Only your fossil fuel, your Qantas, your nicer class of lobbyists.
We shouldn't forget.
People realise how dreadful the media is here and how trivialising. I mean, we have massive honourable exceptions. Of course we do. But, in the Northern Territory, for example, they don't even import a copy of anything except, there's only Murdoch media. In vast swathes of Australia, there is only Murdoch media and Sky News and this rubbish. And because we don't have truth and media legislation passed, why not, we could all ask, they're able to say anything, even in the referendum booklet.
Yeah, I know. And I think there is an interesting other thing that's going on here, perhaps. Maybe I'm going to sound a bit like a conspiracy theorist. You can put me back in my box if you agree. But it seems to me that this is a bit of a dry run for the whole right-wing Trumpist populist tactics, how to muddy a question, how to sow seeds of doubt, how to, inflate and kind of ramp up the worst fears that people have. It's a very populist agenda, and that whilst some of the opposition to the voice maybe, and a lot of it embedded in racism and, colonialisation, also things like, land and worrying about giving Aboriginal people too much control over stuff that might have, lots of juicy mining shit to be dug up. But I think also it may even be more cynical for some people than that. And that is, let's see how far we can derail something, what tactics work. And that really does worry me about future elections as well.
Look, the sad thing about this, Jane, is that there was bipartisan support for the voice until we elected the leader, the current leader of the opposition, the man who walked out on the apologies. As a nation, we did. We voted for him. We didn't elect him. You're right. But he walked out on the apology, and he is the one that has politicised it.
Yeah,
this was not a political football. No. This had bipartisan support. In fact, the Liberals who supported it were so horrified. The man who worked with the group designing this was so horrified, he stepped down from the ministerial position because he was not able to, in all good conscience, carry the arguments that he saw emerging.
In what?
And Julian Lesser.
Yeah,
Julian Lesser was the one that did all the work. And we are now in what has been made political. A referendum is not political. It's a debate about ideas. This has been deliberately made political. And you can see that with the no camp now saying, well, if you lose, what are you going to do about it? Wrong question. If the yes vote loses, what's your answer? What are you going to do about it? You're the one that's taken over the debate. You're the group that has hijacked the argument. You're the one that's muddied the water with lies, misinformation, fear campaigns, and the ultra-right-wing methodology used in America. What are you now going to do to ensure what I'm seeing emerging in our schools? Because in my day job, I work for the Aboriginal Education Council, and we're seeing the emergence of absolute racism going on in schools as Aboriginal kids are being subjected to insults generated outside the home, outside of the school, but manifesting themselves in the school. I mean, that is absolutely appalling. Where once Aboriginal kids were being elected, school captains, they were leaders, absolutely doing amazing things, now are being subjected to the racial and radical abuse that is being perpetrated in the media about how Aboriginal people get everything. They've got so much money. They've got all of this. And the absolute lie that $30 billion a year is spent on Aboriginal people, not mentioning that is the entire budget and that is the percentage that could be identified as being used for Aboriginal people. If we take out what's spent on stale males, I'll guarantee it's a hell of a lot more than $30 billion out of our budget.
Can I just pause us all for a second? Just want to pause us all for a second. Passion's wonderful, but pause us all for a second. People who are watching, if you want to ask some questions, because at about 4:15, so in about 10 minutes, I'll go to some of the questions from the audience. Could you put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat? I'm noticing there's lots going on in the chat. If you put it in the Q&A, that'll make it easier for me to get some of those questions and put them to the panelists. Sorry,
that's all right.
Lynette, go.
I just wanted to make one key point, and that is that Australia actually has signed up to the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I don't know if everybody knows that in 2014, a document was released called Implementing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, a handbook for parliamentarians.
Oh, wow.
And it sets out exactly what they should be doing. And I just wanted to read you just one little thing from the foreword, not all of it, but just the first paragraph that says that in many countries, Indigenous people have been dispossessed of their ancestral lands and territories, as well as deprived of their natural resources upon which they depend for their survival. This can result in the denial of their very right to life. Many Indigenous people continue to suffer discrimination, extreme poverty, and exclusion from political and economic power. Their belief systems, cultures, languages and ways of life are threatened, even to the point of extinction. And then it sets up a whole series of things that they ask parliamentarians to do. And one of the key things in the executive summary in the first section is to ensure that Indigenous people have the right to participate in decision making. And the second one is that they have the right to representation. That's what the voice is about. It's about supporting that. And now who's leading the No campaign to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I ask one
Can we just pause for a second, because what Lynette has summarised there is utterly profound. It's utterly central, because it really goes to this. We are so brainwashed to accept the framework of a colonizing power, that First Nations are still having to petition to have what Lynette has just described.
Yeah,
we are so, and that's what the right wing, or even just the indifferent media call upon. They call upon centuries of conditioning that somehow, let's have a little nod, but really we know best.
Absolutely paternalistic.
It's disgusting.
They're still connected
so
to paternalism. But what I wanted to ask, because I think that a lot of people don't understand this, and it's one of the pieces of misinformation that I think, or maybe interpretation, not misinformation so much, that is being manipulated. And that is, and Bev, I'd like to ask you about this, particularly because of your advocacy for public education, so you will understand it extremely well. This idea that equality means everybody gets the same, which means, which is so many people have that in their head as that's the aim. Everyone gets the same. And yet you and I, we all know that equality is the outcome. Equity is how you get there. Bev, do you want to talk to that for a minute?
Look, it is about equity. It is about fairness. It is about justice, because everybody, I mean, if you have a look at the argument around tax, we all want a flat rate of tax. No, we don't. We want progressive tax. We want from those what you can afford, not to those what you can scrabble. And this is really about the same thing. It's asking people what they think about the things that are going to impact on them. It is about making sure that they have a place. And that's, I mean, there's a cartoon that comes out that says equal is everybody standing on the same box and only one person seeing over the fence. Whereas equity is about different size boxes and everybody seeing over the fence. And we really are about everybody seeing over the fence. Let everyone have a say.
Exactly. It's, a friend of mine said once in a fit of rage about just this misunderstanding about the difference between equality and equity. She said it's getting to the point where, if your grandmother has a wheelchair because she's unable to walk, someone, oh, your grandmother's got a wheelchair. My grandmother should have a wheelchair. Your grandmother can walk. I don't care. Everybody should have the same. It's that kind of ridiculous mindset that we're hearing a lot in this argument and in many other arguments. Lynette, you grinned when I mentioned equality, everybody should get the same. That's fair. This is a misunderstanding of fairness, isn't it?
Well, you only have to look at the current statistics. Look at the Australian Bureau of Stats. They actually do an analysis of where Aboriginal people are currently at, and you can still see the huge gap. I mean, even in the university I work in, you're talking about less than a decade of one Aboriginal person in a senior position. Less than a decade. How many Aboriginal people are in senior decision making? Even though I fought to get an education, I fought to be in this position to create change from within. I'm still fighting to get into a position of power where I can actually say, no, that's not correct.
Every argument against the voice is, if you think about it, the absolute reason why we need the voice. because of the misunderstandings, the lack of understanding.
The vote no is about maintaining the status quo. The vote for yes is about how can we change that. And one of the ways to change it is to have Aboriginal people actively involved in a way that they can have a say and to be listened to. Because I think gone are the days when we have a very paternalistic society that makes decisions on behalf of Aboriginal people, or where different political parties just handpick the people they know that will support what they want them to say. We need to change that.
Yes, we need to change.
Yeah, that's not equity. That's not equity. That's cherry picking.
Oh, that's tokenism, isn't it? I think we've seen that with women. We're seeing it again. It's interesting, Bev. I was thinking about that lovely phrase you said early on, where you said nothing about us without us. I almost wish that had been the Yes campaign's slogan.
So do I.
Nothing about us without us, because I think that it would have made it so clear as to what Indigenous Australians were asking for, and it's very hard to argue against. I've missed a slogan, I have to say, as an old ad woman. I've missed a slogan for the yes case. It's just been yes. There isn't really a line that explains that, and that would have done it. I think
That would have done it.
Yeah.
Let's use it. I mean, we use it across the board in the not-for-profit sector. It's nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely a no-brainer. You can't do things to people.
It's the Boston Tea Party, isn't it? No taxation without representation. It's the same.
It's the same. It's absolutely vital that this be upheld and heard. I mean, part of the debate that I've heard is that Aboriginal people don't agree. 1,200 Aboriginal people came together as part of this before the 200 were elected to go to Uluru. I wish I'd done the maths on it, because there's roughly around, maybe 400,000 people who have identified as being Aboriginal in the country. 1,200 of that beats anything we can put together for the remaining 1-point-something million. Because to get the same percentage, you'd be having 100,000 people, 200,000 people at a meeting, all supposedly agreeing and moving forward. Good luck with that. That'd be like herding cats. Aboriginal people have spoken. They have said this is what they are asking from us. For goodness sake, let's just do the next right thing. The next right thing is to say yes. And I'm stealing from Frozen because I have granddaughters who make me watch the wretched thing. But it's the next right thing. When you don't know what to do the next right thing. And this is, for Aboriginal people, at their request, the next right thing. May not be perfect, but it is the right thing.
I think one of the other misnomers is that people think that Aboriginal people just miraculously all came together for that one workshop.
No, they didn't.
That was 15 years in the making.
Yeah.
15 years of extensive groundwork, going out and consulting with a majority of Aboriginal people on the ground, right across Australia, and then it culminated in this particular meeting where they finally agreed upon what the wording of the Uluru Statement from the heart was. And let's be very clear that it was about Aboriginal people having some power and a say over our own futures. It was about a fair and truthful relationship with all people in Australia. And it really came about because of a result of powerlessness and a struggle for recognition in this country. That's what it's about. So let's remember that.
Beautifully said. Now we've only got 15 minutes left and we've got 14 questions in the Q&A. So let me have a look at them and go. Do you believe, it says the pools, but I'm going to say she means the polls. Would it be possible that they are being manipulated? This is from Robin Henderson. What do you think?
Look, in my heart, in everything I have in me, I pray, I hope, I'm not religious, so I don't pray, but I absolutely believe that at our heart, we are a decent human race. We are a decent people and we can see the logic. I absolutely believe that we will vote in favour of this because it is such just the right thing to do. I'm not sure about the polls being manipulated. I don't know whether any of you have been asked. I certainly haven't been. So I don't know who they're polling or what they're polling. But I'm really, really hoping that when it comes to push comes to shove and people walk in, read the question, they will then say, you know what, to hell with it, yes.
I hope you're right. Lynette, what do you think?
I've just got my fingers crossed and, have hope that the right thing will be done. And as I've said before, it's ironic that Aboriginal people have to go to a referendum to be able to move forward. Not once, but twice.
Yes. There's something wrong with our constitution, perhaps. Stephanie, what do you think? The polls are manipulated?
I don't know whether the polls are manipulated. I have no feeling about that at all. I mean, but they're very partial, and they're not done impartially. So I'm full of hope. I'm so full of hope. I feel my whole life I've hoped when there wasn't hope.
Yeah.
That's the basis of my being.
Yeah.
We have to hope because it's the right thing.
I also heard Joshua Wang, who was one of the Hong Kong demonstrators, when they were fighting with China, and somebody came out of jail and a reporter said to him, what are you doing? I'm going back on the protest front lines. And he said, well, why do you keep doing it? You've got no hope of winning. And he said, no, you're right. He said, but we fight on. I fight on with no hope of winning. I loved that. Yeah. And I hope that's my hope, that whatever happens in this, vote on Saturday, that we fight on with no. The hope of winning is not the point. That's not what you do the fighting for. You do the fighting because it's the right thing to do. And eventually, and you certainly won't win if you don't fight, but there's no guarantee that you will win if you do fight. That's the great conundrum. Now, here's another one. Fear seems to be the most applied tactic in our imported Trumpian opposition to the voice. How is it possible to allay this fear during discussion with no voters? Good question.
My response to that is just stop, use some common sense and think about what you're really saying. Because often when you in hindsight and you just really clearly hear what you're saying, you can hear the nonsense in it. And that's what you need to be doing. It's like when you're having an argument with little kids. You have to say, stop, take a deep breath. Now think about what you just said. Does that sound like it's sensible?
Yeah.
Point out but sometimes people claim to have fear when and that's a cover for other things. I'm afraid, I don't know, I'm not sure, is a good way of saying I'm not a bad person, but I'm going to do something I'm not really comfortable with. Here's one. I'm going to skip through some of them because we are rapidly coming out of time, but one for you, Stephanie. Could you comment on the no vote proposition of the Christians for Equality? Equality might be a clue there. And she says, thanks for a fantastic discussion.
So what are the Christians for Equality?
Christians for Equality.
Yes. Yeah. What about them? Can you say the question again?
Could you comment on the no vote proposition? So I presume these people are pushing a no vote of the Christians for Equality.
Look, I despair. Jane knows this perfectly well. There's nothing Christian about exclusion. The Reverend Dr. Stephanie Dowrick says there is nothing Christian about exclusion. The message of Christianity is a message of inclusion, particularly from the margins. End of story.
Good on you, Stephanie. And here's another one from Julie Conway, which I think is a very pertinent question to consider at this point. What are we going to do after the referendum, yes or no? She goes on to say, I'm going to focus on truth-telling, digging into my settler colonial family history. Well, David Marr's given a great model on doing that. I think this referendum is a call to action. We needed to do so much more working on non-Indigenous Australians. That's a really interesting way of looking at this referendum as a stepping stone. We may not get the result we want, but we have been talking in a way that we haven't done for a very long time about Indigenous Australians and what they want, what needs to be done. That may in and of itself be important. What do you all think? Bev first.
Well, what I'm going to be doing, irrespective of the outcome in my job, my paid work, is that we're going to be working with schools to work out resilience, survival, rebuilding confidence across the board. Because if the no vote gets up, Aboriginal people are being re-traumatised. Yes. Schools are the front line and picking that up. And public schools are the places where most Aboriginal people, children are educated, and they are not funded to do the work that they are required to do. So we will be working very, very closely across the board, looking at programs and practices to shine a light on how we can then start the process of de-traumatising yet another generation of Aboriginal people who have been rejected in their own country.
Yeah, can I just add something to that on my website, stephaniedowrick.com, and also on the John Menadue website, johnmenadue.com, we have clear statements from Leslie Turner, the CEO of the Central Land Council, about exactly what is needed in education in the Northern Territory, as well as in other areas of vital to progress. So we're not talking wishy-washy here. We're talking real effects on real people. And I know that everybody I know who works in Aboriginal health is just desperate for this voice to succeed, because otherwise those figures of disadvantage will become even more shocking. And we're talking about real lives.
Yeah. And real people.
We're talking about real lives. We're not talking about a contest of ideas. We're talking about lives.
It's not statistics. It's real people.
It's not statistics.
Lynette, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think for me, if it's a no vote, it just means more work to continue to educate non-Indigenous people. And a lot of the work that I've started to get engaged in is to start to teach more people more widely, cultural material, and make them have a proper connection to this country. But if it's a yes, then I think it will empower and validate me as an Aboriginal person and give me more feelings that the work that I've been doing for the last 40 odd years is actually the right things that I've been doing, and that somehow it's paid off. But if it's a no vote, I will realise that there's so much more education that needs to be done, and it basically will tell me that at heart, this is a very racist country, and they cannot get out of their colonialistic mentality. That's a reality for me.
Yep. Another one from Barbara, because we've got another 5 minutes. When the referendum fails, how do we manage our anger and anxiety about the future for this country? You've partially answered this, I think, already, Lynette, with saying, well, it's just more work and I'll just have to go back and it'll be a setback, but the work doesn't stop. What about you, Stephanie? How do you think we should manage our anger and anxiety? People I'm noticing already saying, oh, you can't call us racists.
Yeah. Look, our anxiety is very real, and so is our anger. And I think we have to keep naming what causes our anger and what causes our anxiety. And prejudice and discrimination and racism are major causes of ill health. They are major causes of ill health, and so is ugly stereotyping of any kind. So let's turn that around, and let's become the visionaries that we believe we can be. Let's envision the future we want for Australia by Saturday at the very least, and then go on to realize it. You know, we've been given this vision, which is the Uluru Statement of the Heart, that has been given to us by First Nations, to people like me who are non-Indigenous. I take it with a grateful, grateful hand.
And Bev?
My first reaction will be to go under the doona and pull the blankets over my head if no gets up. I think my anger will be such that I will need a lot of time out just to pull it back. I will be so mortifyingly disappointed in my fellow countrymen if they make such a cruel decision. After I have got over my anger, I will just go back to work. And if anyone's interested, Lynette, I have just posted into the chat the project that Lynette has been working on at Sydney University, which is a kinship model which sets out some information around the rich and deep culture of our Indigenous family and friends.
There is a question that I'd like to finish with that's absolutely on that point. It says, how ironic that at this point in history, when our very existence as a species is looking a bit wobbly, that we would disdain this opportunity for consultation with the oldest, most resilient culture the world has ever seen.
Absolutely. We have so much to learn that we refuse to listen to. Our history is littered with pale, stale white people, you know, pretending that they knew stuff. I mean, Burke and Wills are held up as, you know, heroes. They died where people had been living for thousands of years because they would not listen and would not learn. We are in the same boat. If we do not listen and we do not learn, we are at risk of dying out because we are ignoring a culture that has survived for 65,000 years and counting, when ours is, you know, barely 200 years old and is really on the bones of its bottom at the moment. Climate change, massive inflation, financial collapse, you know, disrespect, you name it, on every front. Our culture is doing massively badly. Wars everywhere. We are really not kicking goals.
Anxiety.
Yeah, we're not kicking goals. We absolutely need to listen, to learn, and together we can adapt.
That's a brilliant summing up from you. We've got 1 minute left. Lynette, you want to sum up the discussion, what you want to say, last words?
I think if you go back to just the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, they sum it up. Some of the key things they say is that when we really need to understand and allow the individual and collective rights of Indigenous people. We need to allow Aboriginal people across the world to have their cultural identity. We need to have full and effective participation. That's not ever going to happen by keeping Aboriginal people on the sidelines. And it's our right to maintain our own distinct cultural ways of doing things and our own priorities. But I'm going
to have to cut you off there, Lynette. I feel like Julia Baird on the drum. The news is coming. I've got to rush off to hand out at a polling booth and I'm going to be late. Stephanie, a few last words from you.
I just want to say this message came to us from the heart. Let's receive it in the heart.
Lovely way to finish. Thank you all for paying attention. Sorry I couldn't ask every single question. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, Bev, Lynette and Stephanie.
The audience.
Yep.
All get out there on the next few days and vote yes. But whatever happens, we're having this conversation now. We should not let this conversation end. Yes or no. Thank you all.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.